So, 2020, huh? Yeah, this year's been terrible. Absolutely terrible. And I hope anyone who's watching this is staying safe out there because it's still bad. And who knows, it could get worse. I don't know. But hey, hopefully it gets better. There's vaccines out there. We have a different person in the White House, which is obviously better. Um, so yeah, basically 2020 was a very weird, terrible, terrifying year. But it was a pretty good year for games. And before I post my top 10 of 2020 video, I wanted to do a short video just talking about some honorable mentions that didn't necessarily make it on the list, but I loved. And just some games that I didn't get a chance to cover last year that I do want to cover a little bit. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so first up is a game called Other Side. Other Side is a great tactical RPG that came out almost halfway through the year. It aims to combine tactical RPGs and roguelikes, and it's mostly successful at that. Although the roguelike elements were lighter than I would have liked. It's missing that element of randomization that's common in most roguelikes, and that puts a lot of weight on the tactical RPG side to be successful. Similar to quite a few games this year, it uses a timeline to determine which unit goes next in its turn-based system. Certain abilities can push enemies' turns back further into the timeline, while others may just allow units' turn to come sooner. Out of all the games that use a similar system, Other Side's use of it is the most successful. It can be hard to wrap your head around using the timeline at first, but it's not long until you're taking enemies out before they even have a chance to get to their turn. Similar to the roguelike elements, the RPG side of Other Side sadly doesn't have enough depth to last its lengthy runtime. Your units are very disposable, to the point where the only way you can heal them is by sacrificing another. This is an interesting idea, and it forces you to play it differently than other tactical RPGs, but ultimately it means that it's hard to become too attached to any of your units. Think back to when you've played other tactical RPGs like XCOM. You start the game off, you've got a handful of units, and of course, you rename all of them to your friends, family, pets, whatever you want. And in Other Side, you have that same option. But in Other Side, not even 25% of the way through the game, I just stopped renaming my units. Just completely. And now sure, you reach that point in XCOM, but that's usually at least at the halfway point, or 75% of the way through, or you just never run into it at all. Other Side, I ran into it not even a quarter of the way through the game. I just would hit the randomization button and just go, oh, Mercy? Yeah, that's a fine name. Justine? Yeah, whatever. Let's keep going. That's disappointing, in all honesty. And not to mention, you don't have as much say as how they improve as I would have liked. But even with all of those issues, Other Side is one of the most visually interesting games of the year, and one of the best tactical RPGs on top of it.
I could not protect them all.
Neon Abyss is a roguelike 2D shooter that went underneath the radar for almost everyone. I had never even heard of it until I saw it pop up on Game Pass, which at the time it currently still is, and I just decided to give it a shot on a whim. It almost ended up being my favorite roguelike of the year, which is actually a big deal considering how many roguelikes I loved this year, which you'll definitely see further in this video and in my top 10 of 2020. I mean, sure, it doesn't move the genre forward, and it doesn't really have a hook like most other roguelikes released this past year, so if you've been a big fan of the genre for years, Neon Abyss might not be anything special to you. But it's one of the most satisfying and just fair roguelikes I've played this past year. If you've ever thought about getting into the genre, this was the year for it. And Neon Abyss is the game that sparked my almost year-long addiction to the genre. Most years, I don't like including remakes and remasters on my Game of the Year lists. This year's different. Not because this year wasn't a great year for games, but rather the remakes I included on my list are fantastic. And Mafia Definitive Edition was one of those. It was released in fall of last year right before next-gen consoles were releasing, so sadly it ended up being overlooked. I barely scratched the surface of Mafia back when it was released in 2002, and due to the subsequent titles, I always wanted to go back and check it out. And luckily I don't need to, when Mafia Definitive Edition is a vast improvement on everything the original did. Obviously, the first thing you notice is the visuals, and they are on a different level entirely, not even just comparatively to the original, but also for an open world title in 2020. Clearly there was so much love put into this remake. All of the cutscenes have been redone, and all of the voice acting has been re-recorded also. The new voice actors in particular are incredible, and they give the story so much more weight than it already had. But the most enjoyable component of Mafia Definitive Edition for me was the actual driving. Any car you come across feels great to drive, but also drives like you're dragging a bank vault like in the end of Fast 5. The actual gunplay and melee combat is the worst thing about the package, but their faults are easy to ignore for the most part. If you have any interest in crime or old school Mafia tales, or you just want to drive around in these unwieldy vehicles from the 1930s, then you should give Mafia Definitive Edition a shot. And next, let's get some roguelikes out of the way, since 2020 inadvertently became the year of roguelikes for me. This is probably the point that I should also say what a roguelike is, in case you do not know. You hear the name roguelike, and you're probably not sure exactly what that means, but it's based off an old game called Rogue. Rogue was a game where pretty much everything was randomized, so you go into a level, you don't know what you're going to expect, and once you die, that's it. You restart at the very beginning of the game, and you have to make your way through it in one run. This has pretty much been the gameplay loop of roguelikes. Anything I say that's roguelike on here, guess what? When you die in them, that's it. And that sounds harsh, I bet. And guess what? It is harsh. These games are hard. Almost every roguelike I have on here is very hard, very difficult. You can't make your way through it in the first time you boot it up. It's one of those things you got to kind of grind it out a little bit. And luckily, almost every roguelike I have on this list has enough going on in the background that when you go into a new run, you carry some upgrades, some form of progression. And Risk of Rain 2 is one of those titles that does that. Risk of Rain 2 is a third-person shooter roguelike that is basically a reimagining of the original Risk of Rain. The original is also a roguelike, but it was in 2D. And for the sequel, the developers brought all the elements of the original into the sequel, which was clearly more difficult than it sounds. How they mishmash all of the different elements of the original into this 3D shooter instead is pretty fascinating. For example, there's a character in the original Risk of Rain who had a grappling hook. And that's a lot of fun to do that. But in a 3D game, it's so much more fun. And they had to put so much more work into these environments because you can pretty much zip around anywhere. And there's just so many things on paper in this game when you hear them that don't sound like a huge improvement over the original. But whenever you actually go from the original to the sequel, it's just a different game entirely, but it's all the same elements brought into it. It's just such an interesting experience and also a hell of a co-op shooter roguelike game. If you have a couple of friends who just want to give it a shot, I would definitely recommend it because it is an easy way to just lose 2 hours without even blinking. Alright, what do we got next? Oh, another roguelike, I guess. Yeah. Guess get ready to hear that way more often because I can see a couple on this list right now. My next game I'm going to talk about is Star Renegades. It's, as I mentioned, yet another roguelike, but this one combines the old school turn-based system of the classic Final Fantasies and the like with the timeline system from games such as Other Side. Also, like Neon Abyss, I knew nothing about it until it was released on Game Pass. Seriously, if you haven't tried out Game Pass, what are you doing? I most likely wouldn't even have tried most of my favorite titles this year if they weren't on Game Pass. And before you ask, no, Microsoft did not sponsor this video. And no, they did not pay me. Do I wish they had? Yes. Have I been sending them letters daily, asking them to sponsor me, whatever that means? Yes. Is this a cry for help? Yes. But hey, before you think about that too much, let's talk more about Star Renegades. I was actually pretty close to putting Star Renegades on my Game of the Year list. It's an immensely fun turn-based RPG, and the way it combines roguelike elements into it works ingeniously well. I loved everything from the visuals and soundtrack to the charming characters and writing. The thing holding Star Renegades back from making my Game of the Year list, though, is that runs are just too damn long in this game. A run typically takes a couple hours at the very least, and the length alone would stop me from starting another run once I finished one. But even with that, it's still one of the most polished and satisfying roguelikes I've played. Not only in just the past year, but all time. Whew. Hardspace Shipbreaker. Man, I adore this game. It's basically the Dead Space prequel I've always wanted. You play as a shipbreaker who, surprise, loves to break ships. It's currently still in early access, but I've already gotten more than my money's worth out of it. There's something so satisfying and calming about taking these ships apart piece by piece. Also terrifying. I'm not gonna lie though. I'm not even thinking about just this game. I'm thinking about the sequel. I'm talking Dead Space Shipbreaker. You take the hard out of Hardspace. You put a dead in there. Dead Space Shipbreaker. Also, add Necromorphs. Wilmette's Warehouse is either the perfect game or the absolute worst game for someone who loves organizing to actually play. You are Wilmette, and this is your warehouse. Organize it however you want. You complete orders in between getting more products, and you'll need to organize to get the orders out more quickly. This is just a light, fun indie game with a great soundtrack and a game that I lost more hours than I'd like to even say here. This is also a title that's currently on Game Pass, so you have no excuse not to check it out and lose your mind organizing this warehouse like I did. Next up, I want to talk a little bit about AAA games that came out last year. These are some games that I wanted to cover, and there either wasn't enough to cover or I didn't feel I played enough to actually cover them. But I just wanted to talk about them now just to kind of get them out of the way. Some of these I'll come back to this year, I think, but right now I just kind of want to get some of this stuff out of the way. So the first one up is Assassin's Creed Valhalla. I really wanted to release a video on this last year, but there really isn't that much to talk about. It's another Assassin's Creed title, and if you played any of them since 2017's Origins, then you know what to expect. The story is a bunch of small tales that have no impact, and barely have any connecting tissue between them. In regards to the gameplay, I thought they improved the combat with the addition of the stamina bar. But even with that, the combat's not varied enough to still be enjoyable by the end. And oh boy, can that be a while, because I put 90 hours into this game, and I still haven't reached the end. This was a game I planned on covering, but I got 90 hours in and I just didn't want to go anymore. It was too much. The first dozen or so hours were pretty enjoyable, but the next 90 to 100, not all that much. Speaking of outdated Ubisoft open world games, I also played some Watch Dogs Legion last year. I have even less to say about this than Valhalla though. I was initially very excited about this one. I had a lot of fun playing Watch Dogs 2, and they could have done a lot of interesting things with their whole you can be anyone idea. Not to mention, this was being advertised as the most visually impressive title of the Xbox Series X launch. Although, it failed on capitalizing on any of those elements, sadly. Sure, it looks great, but it has the displeasure of being one of the only PS5 and Xbox Series X titles to not have an option of running at 60 FPS. That frame rate difference made going back to Legion after, say, Valhalla very hard. It also felt more outdated than Valhalla. Everything about it feels like it was stuck in 2016. And allowing you to become anyone felt more cosmetic than anything. They could do a lot more using that idea, and I hope they go back to it in the next title or in another series. As it stands though, Legion feels like a misstep for a series on a hopefully upward trend still. I hope they're able to recover after this one. Speaking of disappointing sequels, let's get Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War out of the way. I'll keep this short because I kind of still want to make a video on this at some point this year. Coming from 2019's Modern Warfare, Black Ops Cold War feels like a backstep. Modern Warfare felt like a marked improvement over what a typical Call of Duty title is, while Black Ops Cold War just feels like the series is at the same spot as it was before the Modern Warfare reboot. Unless you can't enjoy war crimes without Ronald Reagan being there, I'd recommend you go elsewhere for them. Oof, alright, this one. I'm sure even if you haven't played Cyberpunk 2077, you've heard of it. I am so tired of hearing about this game. If you were tired of hearing about Cyberpunk 2077 before its release, then, well, I just hope you're making it through these unprecedented times. I've only played a couple hours of the Xbox One version of the game on my Series X, but I think I'm going to hold off on playing more of it until the next gen patch comes out. I enjoyed what I played, but obviously it's very undercooked. Who knows? It could be one of the best games I play in 2021, or 2022, or 2023, or 2024, or 2025, or 2026, 2027, 2028, 2027. Oh, alright. Sorry, next title. Destiny 2 Beyond Light. My relationship with Destiny 2 is a little unique compared to most other titles. I check in on Destiny 2 every year or so and buy all the expansions I missed. Sometimes I get sucked in, and sometimes I bounce right back off of it. But with the release of Beyond Light this past year, I decided to jump back in, and this was one of the times that I got sucked right in. Beyond Light is a good expansion. That's actually much better than last year's Shadowkeep. But finishing up Forsaken's campaign this year was the highlight of my Destiny 2 experience. Destiny 2 still holds up well visually, and it continues to have some of the best combat you can find in an FPS currently. Dirt 5 is the closest Codemasters has gotten to achieving the insane Mountain Dew swigging swagger of Dirt 2. What else needs to be said? Dirt 2 is like if the teenage me directed a sequel to Colin McRae's Dirt. He would just add more dirt, a very trashy soundtrack filled with the most current nu metal bands, and monster logos everywhere. Dirt 5 is the classy version of that. I didn't get to play as much of it as I wanted to, but if you're like me and the only time you felt alive is when you drove into that mud puddle while Blackstone Cherry played in Dirt 2, then this is the game for you. I bought Animal Crossing New Horizons for my partner. She became the mayor of our island. I had to become a lowly citizen of the island. I was forced to drain our island of our resources for our mayor. I eventually grew tired of living underneath dictator rule and stopped playing this game. My partner, said dictator, then proceeded to time travel and cheat till our island becomes a utopia for them. A tale as old as time. Speaking of games that were huge in 2020, I did play Fall Guys last year. Fall Guys is one of the worst feeling games I've played, but it's also one of the most fun. Pulling the drunken feel of Gang Beasts into a Mario Party-esque platformer turned out to be a fantastic idea. I might not have played as much of Fall Guys as others have, but out of all the titles that became massive during this pandemic, like Among Us and Animal Crossing, Fall Guys was the one that resonated the most with me. It's still no Gang Beasts though. Even with it being a pack-in for the PS5, Astro's Playroom is the most fun I've had with a pure platformer all year. The primary reason for that is the DualSense controller. The controller brings enjoyment out of anything from moving across sand, walking through high grass, or getting blown away by wind. You feel the difference in every different type of surface you walk on, and that does wonders for the actual feel of the platforming. It's a very simplistic platformer, but the DualSense 5 and all of the deep-cut PlayStation references included made playing through Astro's Playroom an absolute joy, and one of the highlights of my whole year. Lastly, I wanted to quickly cover a couple games that I played in 2020 but came out in previous years. Due to the pandemic, I had more time to play games this year than ever before, and I used some of that time to complete some games I've meant to for a while now. The amount of love that Hollow Knight gets from almost everyone who's played it is absolutely massive. It's very similar to the reception of Demon's Souls and Dark Souls back in the day. If you're able to get over the game's hurdles, then it's almost impossible not to love it. Weirdly enough, I didn't hit a wall with Hollow Knight like most other people did though. Now I'm not over here bragging about my hashtag gaming skills or anything, even though they're very good. I promise you, very good. Because while Hollow Knight can be difficult, the comparison between it and From Software titles primarily lie in how obtuse it is. To parse out the story, you have to analyze items and skills you pick up. When you die, you lose all of your money, and the only way to get that back is by making it back to your corpse and fighting it off. When reaching a new area, you have to first find a cartographer, and then buy a map of the area before you're able to see where you're at on the actual map. The latter seems to be the major hang-up for most people bouncing off Hollow Knight, which I get. I mean, you're playing a Metroidvania and you need a map to make any meaningful progress. I was just as frustrated as others because of this, but once I forced my way past that, Hollow Knight became one of my all-time favorite 2D games. I might not have figured out what was actually going on in the story, but almost everything else about Hollow Knight clicked for me. I mean, this is a game I spent 40 hours in, a 2D Metroidvania that's 40 hours. I can't even remember the last time I've heard of that. But it was worth it from beginning to end, and I'd recommend it to basically anyone. Don't ask me why, but for as long as I can remember, I've loved spoiling things for myself. Well, love is a strong word. I'm addicted to spoilers, more like. Almost every time a big new game, movie, or TV show releases, and I don't jump into it right away, I inevitably spoil myself on what actually happens in said piece of media. Resident Evil 7 was one of those casualties. I've been a Resident Evil fan since Resident Evil 4, but I was skeptical of the move to first person initially. I was sure that the game would be primarily aping games like Outlast and Amnesia, instead of what makes a Resident Evil game a Resident Evil game. Well, I was wrong. Resident Evil 7 released to critical acclaim, and I was jealous of everyone being scared to death playing it at launch. So of course I spoiled the game for myself afterwards. and most of the drive I had to play the game died as a result. A few times over the next few years, a friend and I would start to play through Resident Evil 7, but we never made it more than halfway through, much to our dismay. But in 2020, for whatever reason, I finally decided to alleviate that by venturing down to the bayou to visit the bakers. Resident Evil 7 is a Resident Evil-ass video game. Oh, that's a weird sentence. I'm sorry about that. I don't want you to think about Resident Evil asses from now on. You got weird goop monsters, overgrown bugs, eye guys, and a final boss that looks like vomit. So yeah, it's pretty great. It's a scary, spooky, goopy, kooky, and, drumroll please, loopy? Shit, I really should have ended that on kooky. Even with knowing almost everything about Resident Evil 7, I still had a hell of a time playing it this past year. Count me in with all those noisy perverts yelling on the internet about getting stepped on by this vampire lady, because I too am pumped to play Resident Evil Village this year. Alright, and that is it. Oh, wait, what's this last one here? Oh, shit, yeah. Oh yeah, there's one final game I do need to talk about. It's yet another game that took me years to finally appreciate. Unlike Hollow Knight and Resident Evil 7 though, I'm not proud of liking this game. Here we go. Since this is a safe space, I finally feel comfortable saying this. I'm a Fortniter. Yep, that's me. A Fortnite fan, a Fortnite man, an epic gamer if you will. No, I don't know what's wrong with me. My partner loves Fortnite more than almost anything, and she has been trying to get me into it for years. It just felt so basic compared to other battle royales to me. So anytime we would play, I would bounce right off. Turns out all I needed to enjoy Fortnite properly was a worldwide pandemic. This year, more than any other before, I needed escapist entertainment. I needed games that I could play while doom scrolling Twitter. I needed games that I could jump into at any point or time. I needed Fortnite. And, well, roguelikes, I guess. The same reason I pushed Fortnite away is the same reason I eventually fell for it. Even scumbags like me find true love in the most unlikely of places. I'm not gonna lie though. I am getting tired of this relationship. I give Fortnite $10 a month at least, but it can't even bother to get me Grogu. How tired has the relationship gotten when Grogan, whatever the plural form of Grogu's is, are not exchanged between partners? I mean, it's just a given. On Valentine's Day, Grogu's are exchanged. They're exchanged between partners. That's it. And I haven't even gotten them yet. So, I guess I'm just going to have to play another free-to-play shooter or battle royale game, I guess. This one, I can't even say this one. What's this? Warface. Yeah, I can say this one. Yeah. Warface, or what's this? Oh, no. Okay, maybe I'll stick with Fortnite a little bit longer. And now we've covered those games, my next video is going to be about my top 10 games of 2020. It's probably going to be about the same length as this video, and then further on I'm probably going to do some more reviews before I move on to my next in the Looking Back series. But thank you for watching, and like, subscribe, do the business, hit the little bitty bell so you know when I post videos. Follow me on Twitter, follow me on Twitch. I was going to make a joke about follow me on Parler, but I don't even want to make that joke because it's stupid and Parler sucks. But hey, thanks for watching the video, and I will see you next time.